Thank you, Lord Clerk. I'm always rather full of emotion on these occasions. And one of the reasons I'm so full of emotion is that I am one lone voice, but I speak on behalf of 130 to 140,000 solicitors in England and Wales. The current President, John Wotton, has made it plain that my profession supports totally this movement's aims in relation to Camp Ashraf. In September of this year, with a number of those I see scattered around this room, I took part in a demonstration outside the UNCHR's headquarters, the High Commissioner for Refugees headquarters, and I delivered on behalf of 130,000 solicitors a letter demanding intervention. Again, cause and effect are difficult, aren't they? But that was real, significant, authoritative pressure, coupled with pressure from others, speaking in their different roles. And what do we have? We have a special envoy appointed. There need to be visits to Camp Ashraf on the part of the special envoy, for one. There absolutely needs to be a team of observers from the UN. That is the absolute bottom line demand. There need to be a series of delegations, not just pressing the case for trade with Iraq. That's behind a lot of this, isn't it? But delegations from Parliament, and I add this, delegations from my profession. For a long time, the NCRI has had in the bank an application from me, fully completed, for a visa to visit Camp Ashraf. I would not be alone. These are issues the Law Society concerns itself with deeply, and so will always concern itself with deeply. Thank you so much for listening. Never doubt the commitment and the emotional concern that my body has, my professional body has for this issue, and I pledge my own personal efforts that will continue. No one's going to stop me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've been involved for something like 8 years acting on behalf of the PMOI in the European courts. We started in about 2003, I think it was, 2002, 2003, and with proceedings in French against the measures at the time. We fought on, very much supported by Lord Slynn, whose name is inextricably linked with the success of what we have achieved so far in this matter, and the delisting of the PMOI. And we fought against the Council, the Commission, and various governments who were dead against us. And we won case after case in the European courts. And by the end, we reckon we'd set aside something like 17 different decisions listing us. So effectively the score was 17-0 to us. We never lost one. The PMOI in Europe have been delisted. In England, in the United Kingdom, they've been delisted, mainly because of the action in the United Kingdom by the parliamentarians, which led to the immortal words of the Court of Appeal saying that the decision was perverse, and everyone's waiting now to see whether the United States will adopt a sensible position on this, compatible with their activities, recent activities, the President's activities, and it's waiting very much to see what Secretary of State Clinton does on these matters at the moment. The pressures ought really to be not so much telling the Foreign Secretary what to do, but to tell him to have courage of his own convictions, as to make his own foreign policy. And so I think if there is a message to go, from my point of view, it may be the wrong point of view, but my point of view is to tell the Foreign Secretary and his ilk that they really must make up their own mind and not rely upon the officials. No doubt going back to the 1938, the Foreign Office officials were telling Chamberlain, this is what you ought to be doing, and that's what he did. Everyone now knows that was the wrong thing to do. He ought to have had the courage of his own convictions and adopted his own view in these matters. That's why he's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. Seems to me that that is not an excuse for being unprincipled. And I would very much advocate that a principled position can have only one answer, and that's the answer that everyone here wants to hear from the government in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful to the two previous speakers, too, for emphasizing the important role of law in this issue. As an international lawyer, and I was asked to provide an opinion earlier this year on the status of the residents of Camp Ashraf in international law, and the implications of that status for the mandate of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, an office for which I once worked for 12 years as a legal advisor. Now, the purpose of my opinion, as I mentioned, was to clarify the status of the camp residents and to see what that meant from the perspective of UNHCR's protection mandate. And looking at the evidence, looking at the facts, looking at the background, I came to the clear conclusion that here we had a group prima facie meeting all the requirements of refugee status in international law. And what I wanted to reiterate, to emphasize at this point, is what international protection means. It means that the UNHCR and states supporting the UNHCR must bring home to the government of Iraq its international obligations, to remind them of what is due to refugees on their territory. They may not want to maintain their residence in Iraq, but they must not treat them inhumanely. There are international obligations here. This is a point, of course, this is an aspect of the rule of law, a key item in the agenda which the United Nations has set for Iraq, and which was part and parcel of the Security Council giving its consent, if you like, to the continued presence of the occupation forces and to the program of democratic reform in that country. These are the reasons why the UN, that's to say the international community of states at large, has a legal interest in what is happening in the camp in Ashraf, what is happening to the residents of that camp. So the rule of law gives the international community, gives this country a legal interest in the future of those residents. But we must also play our part. There is a role here for the United Kingdom, for other individual countries in Europe and elsewhere, to provide, to help the UNHCR, to provide the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We should be supporting Iranians who wish to change the regime in Iran, because it seems to me that that is a very worthy cause. I apologize for being late today, but one of the reasons I was late, I was sending a letter to William Hague saying to him, I just don't understand what our policy is towards Iran, and would you please clarify? Frankly, although I would prefer, this was a jibe, I would prefer to have a clear direction from him. What Catherine Ashton was saying was infinitely more preferable than anything that he had been saying up to now. And I strongly support that. So if in a sense you might think that was something of a cheap jibe, but I think it's still one that was merited in the circumstances. And I think time after time we have seen that display of muddle coming from the Foreign Office in our attitudes towards Iran, which really ought to come to an end once and for all. I thought we had achieved that too. And I cannot remember any time in my life when a British government was quite so taken to task by the Court of Appeal in London for what it had done in the prescription of the PMOI. And not surprisingly, the delisting that started in this country, I'm proud to say, has extended right across Europe with this one last exception. And I very much hope that that will go our way too. I mean, Madame Rajavi has on occasions spoken before the European Parliament, in which there are British MEPs. And it is the 10-point plan of Mrs. Rajavi that I think that should be followed through for free and democratic Iran. And I think that it is time now for this government to recognize that there are substantial grounds for supporting the Iranian resistance, in whether it is actually in Iran itself or beyond the borders of it. And I think it is really finally time for us to do that. But in the meantime, our first task, and we will continue to do it, Hussein, as best we can, is ensure that those residents in Camp Ashraf are protected on humanitarian grounds. But beyond that, we have still a further and more important objective. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I personally feel that we are at a very critical time for residents of Ashraf. Gaddafi is overthrown, which was very brutal dictator, and that gave a very critical message to the remaining dictators that they are not far behind, their turn will come. In Parliament in the UK and other parliaments has to really stand up and ask our own government that they should really try to stick to the principle which this country is famous for and don't sell people of Ashraf down the river. So I think that's a message which this should give out to everyone concerned, and also to the resident in Ashraf, that we as parliamentarians in this country are 100% behind them, and we applaud and salute their courage in fighting in such difficult circumstances. Thank you.
I don't know. My Lord Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I know I speak for everyone when I extend. Now, since we last met, Lord McGuinness and myself attended a delegation led by the Speaker of Iraq and parliamentarians. And during that meeting, we made it absolutely clear that we wanted to visit Camp Ashraf. And I very much hope that that will happen. I welcome the positive steps taken by the United Nations and the European Union to deal at Camp Ashraf. I believe it was the right decision by Baroness Catherine Ashton as the European Union's foreign policy chief to appoint an envoy dedicated to paying attention to the appalling situation at Camp Ashraf. I say it was the right decision, but I am quick to add that it is certainly not enough. And the European Union must play a leading role to obligate the Iraqi government to respect the rights of Ashraf residents under international humanitarian law. Believing that Iraq would lift this unlawful deadline must be one of our major priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, justice is what we want, and justice is what we parliamentarians intend to achieve for the residents of Camp Ashraf.